In the quiet farmland town of Havenbridge, an ordinary morning shatters under the thunderous roar of a helicopter landing in the middle of a school field. Stepping onto the grass is a determined grandfather, ready to defend his grandson at all costs. What secret sparks this high-stakes standoff, and why can't anyone tear their eyes away? 11-year-old Leo Thompson woke before sunrise, like he did every day on his family's farm in Havenbridge, Virginia. Outside his window, the horizon glowed in soft pink and orange tones, signaling the start of another busy morning. Leo yawned, rubbed the sleep from his eyes, and tossed on jeans and boots. While other kids might be glued to video games or social media on weekends, Leo spent his free time tending to Thompson Fields, the sprawling farmland that had been in his family for generations. By the time he helped feed the chickens, checked on the horses, and collected fresh eggs, he was usually ready for anything. But the real test came during Mr. Grant's 7th grade history class at Havenbridge Middle School. Mr. Grant was known for being old-fashioned, a strict teacher who preferred students to stay silent, jot notes, and not question the textbook. As Leo climbed off the school bus that morning, he took a deep breath. His parents, Ian and Sophia Thompson, always encouraged him to speak up for what he believed in, whether it was about farm life or schoolwork. Little did Leo know by the end of the day, his willingness to speak out would land him in more trouble than he had ever faced before. The bell rang, echoing along the corridors as students poured into their respective homerooms. Leo made his way to Mr. Grant's classroom, where rows of desks faced a whiteboard filled with neat, precisely written notes. "Today," Mr. Grant announced, adjusting his glasses, "we'll continue our unit on American agriculture. Our focus is on the decline of small family farms and the rise of corporate operations." Leo perked up. It was a topic he knew intimately. His family's own farm was thriving through modern techniques like crop rotation, sustainable irrigation, and tech-driven solutions. As Mr. Grant handed out reading packets, Leo's eyes scanned the text. His brow furrowed. Some of the claims were outdated or flat-out incorrect, particularly those suggesting most small farms were on the brink of extinction. Summoning his courage, Leo raised his hand. "Excuse me, Mr. Grant," he began carefully. "This handout says most family farms can't compete with corporations, but that's not always true. My family's farm uses new technology, and we're doing well. Lots of others are too." Mr. Grant narrowed his eyes. "Leo," he said in a clipped tone, "the textbook is based on government data. I'd appreciate it if you saved personal opinions for after class." Heat rose to Leo's cheeks. "Sir, with respect, this isn't just an opinion. Families like mine prove—" "That's enough," Mr. Grant snapped, voice echoing in the stunned silence. "You're disrupting the lesson. If you don't stop contradicting the material, you can leave my classroom." There it was. The shock in his classmates' faces told Leo this confrontation was serious. He swallowed hard, heart hammering in his chest. Yet, he refused to back down. "I'm just trying to help everyone get accurate information," he said, keeping his voice steady. Mr. Grant's face turned a deep shade of red. "I warned you. Office. Now." And so, with several pairs of eyes glued to him, Leo gathered his belongings and stepped into the hallway, a swirl of emotions in his chest. Confusion, anger, and the slightest twinge of fear. Leo found himself in the front office sooner than expected. The walls were lined with decades-old awards and school trophies. Principal Marjorie Clark, a stern woman with silver-streaked hair, ushered him into her office. "Leo," she said, lacing her fingers, "I got a call from Mr. Grant. He says you disrupted his lesson." Leo's frustration bubbled over. "I wasn't disrupting anything, ma'am. I was trying to correct information I know is outdated. My family runs a farm and—" Principal Clark held up a hand. "Even if you disagree with the material, there's a time and place to express concerns. Arguing in front of the whole class isn't it?" He opened his mouth to protest, but saw her disapproving frown and decided not to push further. "I'm afraid I have to follow protocol," Principal Clark concluded. "You're suspended for the rest of the day. We'll discuss tomorrow if further action is needed." Suspended? Leo's stomach dropped. Never in his life had he been in serious trouble. A staff member called his mother, Sophia Thompson, who arrived within the hour. She offered Leo a sad, concerned look as he was sent home. After a silent car ride back to Thompson Fields, Leo recounted the entire story, from the moment he raised his hand to the trip down the hallway. His mother sighed. "Mr. Grant's never been fond of questions that challenge his classroom narrative," she said. "But this still seems extreme. Your father will want to hear all of it." Just as she predicted, Leo's father listened intently, jaw clenched in anger. "Suspended for speaking up? That's outrageous." Then, a deep baritone voice interrupted from the back porch. Gabriel Thompson, Leo's grandfather, an imposing figure who'd built their farm into a profitable operation thanks to sharp business acumen and a determination never to let his family be disrespected. "Suspended for telling the truth," Gabriel said slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. "We'll handle this, son. I promise you that." The firmness in his tone made one thing clear. Gabriel wasn't about to let this rest. Tomorrow morning, Leo's teacher and principal were in for a surprise. Dawn broke over Havenbridge with a light mist drifting across the fields. Leo could barely sleep, replaying the previous day's events in his mind. He woke before the rooster crowed, anxious about returning to school, or if the principal would even allow him back. However, Gabriel Thompson, Leo's grandfather, had other plans. At 6 o'clock sharp, Gabriel stood outside the barn, giving instructions to a hired pilot who had just arrived. The pilot was inspecting a vintage helicopter that Gabriel had purchased years ago to monitor farmland expansions. It was rarely used, but today called for something special. Leo, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, gazed at the aircraft with a mix of awe and confusion. "Grandpa," he murmured, "why are you flying this thing now?" His grandfather offered a wry smile. "They think they can brush you aside for telling the truth. We'll make sure they hear us loud and clear." His tone was calm, but the resolve in his eyes told Leo there was no talking him out of it. Moments later, the helicopter's rotors whirred to life, scattering dust and straw across the yard. Ian and Sophia Thompson rushed outside, clearly concerned. Sophia pressed a hand to her temple. "Dad, this is dramatic." Gabriel simply shrugged. Sometimes dramatic is what people need to see. Then he turned to Leo and gestured for him to climb aboard. "Son, if they're going to suspend you for knowing the facts, we'd best show them what real authority looks like." Within minutes, Leo was strapped into a seat, heart pounding in his chest as the helicopter lifted off the ground, the farm shrinking below. The early sunlight glinted off the metal frame, and a wave of exhilaration swept through him. He felt a mixture of nerves, triumph, and a flicker of guilt. He didn't want to cause trouble for his parents, but neither did he want to stay silent. Soon, the helicopter soared above winding roads and sprawling pastures, heading straight for Havenbridge Middle School. Leo wondered if the teachers and students were already in their classrooms, if Principal Clark was sipping her morning coffee, unaware of the spectacle about to unfold. At Havenbridge Middle School, the day had begun like any other. Principal Clark was reviewing the attendance records in her office, while Mr. Grant prepared for his first class, still bristling from the previous day's standoff. He half expected Leo Thompson to walk back into the room with some rebuttal, but also felt relieved that the troublemaker might be barred from returning for a while. That's when a thunderous noise cut through the early silence, a deep, pulsing thrum that rattled windows and sent teachers to the hallway in alarm. From her office, Principal Clark stared out the large glass pane overlooking the athletics field. Her coffee cup shook in her hands as she realized what was happening. A helicopter was descending right onto the grassy sports area. Students darted to the nearest windows, phones raised to capture the bizarre sight. A black vintage helicopter touched down, blowing grass clippings everywhere. The door swung open, and out stepped Gabriel Thompson, tall and commanding, with Leo hopping onto the field behind him. Mr. Grant, who had rushed to the window along with half his class, felt his stomach lurch. He recognized Leo immediately, and the older man looked unmistakably like trouble in a pressed jacket and boots that meant business. Principal Clark dashed outside, struggling to keep her composure. "Mr. Thompson," she called over the roar of the slowing rotors. "This is a school. What on earth do you think you're doing?" Gabriel calmly adjusted the collar of his jacket. "Making sure my grandson isn't punished for telling the truth," he said, voice carrying above the clamor, "and ensuring everyone here understands the situation properly." Behind him, Leo gripped his backpack straps, cheeks flushed. Every eye in the school seemed trained on them. Whispers spread among the gathering students. Some stared in awe, others recorded videos with wide-eyed fascination. "This has to be a violation of school policy," Principal Clark fumed, though her confident tone faltered in the face of Gabriel's unwavering posture. Gabriel cast a sweeping glance around. "It's an interesting policy that suspends a child for pointing out factual errors in class. Let's just say I'm here to rectify that." Security personnel hurriedly escorted Gabriel and Leo indoors to avoid creating more of a scene. Meanwhile, teachers struggled to herd gossiping students back to their homerooms. Principal Clark led the Thompsons straight to her office, her expression a cocktail of anger, shock, and a hint of unease. Mr. Grant, invited to the meeting, stood by the wall, arms folded. He tried to hide the tremor in his voice. "I don't know what you hope to accomplish with this spectacle," he said, barely meeting Gabriel's gaze. "We have rules in place." Gabriel settled into a chair across from Principal Clark's desk. "I believe the only rule my grandson broke was daring to correct outdated material," he replied coolly. "And for that, you sent him home." Principal Clark cleared her throat. "Mr. Thompson, we have protocols about classroom conduct. Your grandson challenged Mr. Grant in a disruptive manner. At least, that's the report I received." Leo tensed. "I wasn't disruptive. I just tried to share real data about how small farms are innovating. Mr. Grant didn't want to hear it." Mr. Grant glared. "You should have saved your questions for the end of class or scheduled a meeting afterward. Instead, you undermined my teaching." Gabriel held up a hand. His voice remained measured, but his words carried weight. "Do you hear yourself, Mr. Grant? My grandson undermined you by stating facts. If that's enough to get someone suspended, we've got a bigger problem than I thought." Principal Clark's knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of her desk. She understood how precarious this situation was. Gabriel Thompson had deep roots in Havenbridge, and a reputation for championing local farmers' rights. He was not a man easily dismissed. Plus, the helicopter stunt had already drawn half the town's attention. "What do you want from us?" she asked finally, voice low. Gabriel's gaze flickered to Mr. Grant, then back to the principal. First, an immediate lift of Leo's suspension, with no blemish on his record. Second, a genuine apology for disrespecting a knowledgeable student. And third, he paused for effect, a commitment to review and, if necessary, update the curriculum material so no other student is punished for telling the truth. A heavy silence settled in the room. Leo held his breath, hardly believing his grandfather had marched in with such direct demands. Mr. Grant's cheeks reddened. Principal Clark's lips pressed into a thin line. No one spoke at first. Then Principal Clark exhaled, like someone finally deciding to set down a heavy weight. "We can discuss the suspension and an apology," she conceded. "As for the curriculum, we'll gather updated resources," Gabriel interjected. "If we have to, we'll rally the community to support more accurate lessons. I don't want to see other students forced to stay silent just because the textbook is out of date." Mr. Grant bristled. "You can't just barge in here and rewrite our educational guidelines." Gabriel's eyes glinted with determination. "Then I'll gladly take it up with the Havenbridge School Board, my friend. They're more than willing to listen when I pay them a visit, and I suspect the local news outlets will too." That last statement sent a palpable wave of tension through the office. Everyone understood that if the story of a teacher suspending a farm kid for correcting inaccuracies went public, it would cause an uproar, one that could tarnish the school's reputation. Principal Clark took a moment, scanning Mr. Grant's rigid stance and Leo's earnest eyes. Finally, she turned to Gabriel. "All right," she said. "Let's do what's right then." By lunchtime, word had spread across Havenbridge Middle School that Leo Thompson was back on campus. Students whispered in the corridors, eyeing him with newfound curiosity. Many had seen the dramatic helicopter landing, and rumors flew about Leo's grandfather single-handedly standing up to the administration. At the cafeteria, Leo was more nervous than he'd ever admit. Even though Principal Clark had lifted his suspension, he worried Mr. Grant might still harbor resentment. However, just before lunch ended, the principal made an announcement over the PA system. "Attention, students and staff. Mr. Grant would like to address the 7th grade class in the auditorium. All 7th graders, please report there immediately." Leo's heartbeat spiked, and a subtle hush descended over the bustling cafeteria. Mr. Grant rarely gave public speeches. Minutes later, the 7th grade students filed into the auditorium, a wide, echoing space with rows of seats and a stage at the front. Mr. Grant stood by the microphone, shifting uncomfortably under the spotlight. Principal Clark stood nearby, watching with a stoic expression. Once the students settled, Mr. Grant cleared his throat. "I'd like to speak about yesterday's incident with Leo Thompson," he began, voice tense but audible. "I realize I handled the situation poorly. In my rush to keep order, I dismissed Leo's knowledge and questioned his respect for our rules." A ripple of surprise and a bit of awe ran through the crowd. Leo sat near the back with a couple of classmates. He felt equal parts tense and relieved as Mr. Grant continued. "The truth is," the teacher went on, "Leo's insights weren't wrong. Our textbooks don't always reflect the latest farming practices, and his family's experiences are valid. I should have been more open to hearing him out, rather than escalating the conflict." A hush spread over the students. Mr. Grant exhaled sharply, as though summoning his final bit of courage. "I'm publicly apologizing to Leo. He was suspended for an honest effort to share accurate information. From now on, I'll do my best to update our course material and remain open to student input, provided it's shared respectfully." The moment he finished, Mr. Grant lowered the microphone, face flushed with a mix of emotions. Principal Clark took the stage, nodding. "Thank you, Mr. Grant. Students, consider this an example. Even adults can learn from mistakes." A soft applause broke out, tentative at first, then warmer as more students joined in. Leo slumped in his seat, a knot of tension uncoiling in his chest. He had braced for defiance, not acceptance. This was far from the outcome he'd expected just one day earlier. Word of the helicopter landing and the subsequent apology didn't just stay within the school's walls. Parents heard the news from their children, and soon it rippled across Havenbridge. Social media posts popped up, recounting the dramatic moment a local farmer flew onto the school field to defend his grandson. Back at Thompson Fields, Leo found himself the unexpected center of attention. Neighbors dropped by with curious smiles and questions. Even old friends of Gabriel Thompson called to congratulate him for taking a stand. Ian and Sophia balanced their pride with a bit of exasperation. No parent loves seeing their child in conflict, even if the cause is justified. But they couldn't deny how the events had united people in conversations about education, farming, and respect for differing viewpoints. After dinner, Gabriel took Leo aside. The setting sun cast long shadows over the barnyard, where rows of crops stood tall. "You okay?" his grandfather asked, resting a hand on Leo's shoulder. Leo nodded. "I just never thought it would blow up like this." A ghost of a smile touched Gabriel's lips. "Sometimes, standing your ground causes more of a stir than you'd expect." He took a measured breath, gazing out at the fields. "I'm proud of you, son." The simple words made Leo's throat feel tight. "Thanks, Grandpa. Really." They stood there in comfortable silence, the hum of crickets in the distance, realizing that while the school drama might die down, the deeper lessons about courage, honesty, and family support would stick with them much longer. The next morning, Leo returned to school with a weight off his shoulders. Hallways buzzed with the usual chatter, quizzes, weekend plans, jokes among friends. Yet, here and there, a few kids shot him thumbs up or whispered, "That was awesome," recalling the spectacle of the helicopter landing. In Mr. Grant's classroom, the atmosphere felt different. The teacher waited at his desk as students shuffled in. When the bell rang, he rose, clearing his throat. "Good morning, class," he said, voice calm. "Yesterday we had a meaningful lesson in humility, I'd say. From now on, if any of you have relevant information about what we're studying, let's talk it through together." Leo offered a small, appreciative nod. He didn't expect Mr. Grant to change overnight, but this was a start. He settled into his seat, listening more openly than before. And so began a new chapter, not just in the classroom, but in the broader Havenbridge community. Encouraged by Leo's example, other students started to share experiences, some about family businesses, others about cultural traditions the textbooks barely mentioned. Teachers found themselves learning alongside their pupils. For Leo, each day felt a little brighter now. He'd realized that defending the truth wasn't about winning or losing. It was about ensuring nobody got silenced for having knowledge or perspective worth sharing. As weeks went by, Havenbridge Middle School quietly evolved. Small but significant changes rippled through the 7th grade corridors. Teachers who once lectured with unquestionable authority began to invite student discussion, realizing how valuable real-life experiences could be. The campus even organized an Agriculture Awareness Day, where students could bring exhibits of their families' farm histories, share photographs, and explain modern farming methods. Leo found himself busier than ever, helping plan the event. In the afternoons, he juggled homework with chores on Thompson Fields, gathering up old farm tools and pictures for display. His grandfather, Gabriel, encouraged him every step of the way. "This is bigger than just us," Gabriel said, polishing a vintage tractor part Leo planned to exhibit. "Let people see how family farms can thrive when they adapt and innovate." Leo's parents also noticed a new sense of confidence in him. Gone was the fear of speaking up. In its place stood a calm resolve. Even Mr. Grant assisted, offering to grade extra credit projects based on real-life agricultural research. Though it wasn't an overnight transformation, Leo appreciated every step toward a classroom that welcomed his knowledge. On the morning of the Agriculture Awareness Day, local news reporters arrived, intrigued by the story of a student whose grandfather famously landed a helicopter on the school field. They filmed short interviews with Leo, Gabriel, and a few teachers, including Principal Clark, who managed a wry smile whenever anyone mentioned that extraordinary day. "We hope today shows how education benefits from strong ties to the community," Principal Clark said, gesturing to rows of farming displays in the school courtyard. "When our students see they can contribute knowledge, we all gain." While some older students rolled their eyes at the sudden media attention, younger ones buzzed around with excitement, snapping photos and playing with the interactive exhibits. After all, events like this weren't typical for Havenbridge, a town more accustomed to quiet routines than press cameras and farm equipment in a schoolyard. Leo took it all in, feeling a sense of fulfillment he'd never quite experienced before. He realized that by standing up for what he knew, he'd inadvertently helped open new doors for everyone, students, teachers, and neighbors alike. By the time summer break loomed, life had settled into a gentler rhythm for the Thompsons. Days on the farm were still long and filled with hard work, but there was an undercurrent of optimism that energized them all. Mr. Grant, though still strict in many ways, now routinely asked if anyone had real-world experiences to share, rather than sticking rigidly to the textbook. Principal Clark continued meeting with community leaders and Gabriel Thompson, hashing out ideas to keep the school curriculum updated. With local farms providing first-hand insight, students began exploring topics like sustainable irrigation, drone technology, and eco-friendly pest management. Leo spent the early mornings and weekends caring for livestock, maintaining fences, and planting new seed varieties alongside his parents. Despite the demands of the farm, he found new motivation in academics too. His curiosity about the environment, economics, and history led him to study independently, blending traditional learning with practical fieldwork. One bright afternoon, Leo and Gabriel stood at the edge of a freshly planted soybean field, surveying the neat rows stretching toward the horizon. Overhead, a light wind rustled the leaves of nearby trees. "Grandpa," Leo said, "I know some people thought you went too far with that helicopter stunt, but thank you. None of this change would have happened if you hadn't spoken up." Gabriel placed a hand on Leo's shoulder. "You spoke up first, kiddo. I only made sure they heard you." Together they watched the fields sway under the sun. In that moment, the farmland wasn't just a piece of property. It was a testament to resilience, growth, and family legacy. And soon the seeds they'd planted would burst through the soil, a tangible reminder that standing your ground and nurturing what you believe in yields a harvest greater than you ever imagined. As for Havenbridge Middle School, it carried on, its walls now echoing with a new spirit of openness and curiosity. From time to time, students and staff alike caught themselves glancing at the sky, recalling that wild day when a helicopter landed on the soccer field and changed their perspectives forever. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to share it with friends who appreciate a good twist, and subscribe to our channel for more dramatic tales. Stick around. We've got plenty more unforgettable moments on the way.